Yeah, and that we have a clean conscience. I think that's the most important thing, that we should be in a state of grace. We should go to confession. And it seems that there are a lot of people who are talking about confession now, even people who are not Catholic, who are talking about Catholic. Michael, you want to pull up that video? I thought this was interesting.
Catholic, but I've always thought that confession's the coolest thing they do.
It's a gift, man. It's a lifesaver.
Of course. When it became psychotherapy and you put like an atheist with bad judgment on the couch across from you, I don't think we lost something. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the human need to connect, to unburden yourself, you know what's wrong, by the way. Most people know. You know. You don't need to be a Christian to know what's wrong. Everyone knows. Inside you know when you're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And to say it out loud, to articulate it in words, is to rid yourself of it to some extent, I think. And
and then for the sacramental part of it, that's where the healing comes in. That's where the spiritual healing comes in. So it's like if you're a cheesecloth full of holes, right? And you go into confession and you receive the sacrament of reconciliation from the priest. And the priest, we believe he's been given divine authority that has maybe a not visible, but a tangible, physical, metaphysical effect on the casing of your soul. And it's like mending the little holes. Every confession is like you're closing up those holes and restoring that connection with God in a way that is essentially repairing your soul.
Yeah, such a good clip.
Yeah, well, especially that, it's Jonathan Rumi who plays Jesus in The Chosen, and Tucker, who's not Catholic, who's Episcopalian.
Mm-hmm.
But it's funny to see that, because we hear a lot of times from our non-Catholic brothers and sisters, like, well, I don't have to confess my sins to some guy, that I just go straight to God. But like Tucker sees the importance of it, that there's something to it other than, even if you don't believe in the sacramental part about it, that there's something just psychologically about unburdening yourself from those things that we hold on to. We see tons of stories like the Telltale Heart, or, the Dostoevsky characters, where these people do bad things and it drives them insane because they're carrying this guilt and they're hiding it and they're lying to cover up the different lies. But when we have, this opportunity to unburden ourselves and to say, my fault, it's through my fault, have mercy on me, I messed up, and to get that off of our so-called chests, that there's something physical to that. I know, and we have the beauty of the sacramental grace that comes with the actual forgiveness that, Jesus gave, the apostles and their apostles to forgive sins, and then to infuse us with grace to help us to sin no more. It's just a beautiful thing.
There's a remedy in having to reflect on your actions, and in reflecting, having to articulate what that action is. That takes an inner strength and humility, because then you're defining that thing that you're doing that's wrong, right? Because if it stays within inside you, it stays ambiguous, and you can't put your finger on it. And if you can't put your finger on it, you can't choose that which is good in opposition to it. So that's the first thing that the sacrament of confession does. It forces you not only to think, but to put into words,
identify
that which is destructive to you and to your relationship with God and to others, right? Because that's what the sacrament of confession does. In receiving absolution, I'm not only reconciled to God, I'm reconciled to my brothers and sisters. Because sin doesn't affect just you; it affects
There's no just
others.
Private sins.
Yeah, that's the first thing. The second thing is, the unburdening. Like when I have to actually go and speak it to somebody else, now I'm holding myself accountable, right? And you approach the confessional. The priest, even though he's sitting there wearing a stole, right, that thing around his neck, it's symbolic of the judge. It's a throne of mercy. So you're laying your sins before God, because in that very moment, the priest is acting in the person of Christ. You're placing those things that have kept you away from Christ before him, asking for his forgiveness. The only sin that Jesus tells us that is unforgivable are those sins that we think God can't forgive. If we think that there's something that, I'm such a great sinner, I keep doing the same thing over and over again, there's no way God's going to forgive me, that's the sin that you're going to be judged on, because you've placed limits on God's mercy. That's something we can never do. So never tire, Pope Francis tells us, of approaching God and seeking his forgiveness. So the second thing is, you unburden yourself, then I place my sins before God, knowing that he loves me more than my sins. And then in receiving absolution, I walk away. It's like I no longer need to carry anxiety over my sins with me. I'm freed from that, from needless worry, right? We say that in Mass. I've received what, God being the divine physician knows what we need. So in reflecting and in articulating, it's a self-remedy for myself. In receiving absolution, God, the divine physician, he heals me by granting me certitude that I have been forgiven. Through the words of absolution, I know without a shadow of a doubt that I have been forgiven, that my slate has been wiped clean, right? That those sins no longer are bound to me, keeping me from God. I go and I do penance. I make up because God is also just, right? There's scales that have been tipped. And I do my part in the sacrament. I participate in God's grace because it's his grace that forgives me by doing that penance. But then I can walk away certain that I've been forgiven. That certitude doesn't come when it's just me in my room, when it's just me and just going straight to Jesus. Does Jesus hear me? Yes. Jesus isn't bound by the sacraments. But do I have that certitude that I actually confessed it, that I actually spoke it, that I held myself accountable to it? Do I have that certitude that, yes, God has forgiven me? And Jesus knows this. That's why you alluded to, he turns to the apostles and he says, whatever you bind in heaven, whatever you bind on earth is bound in heaven, whatever you loose on earth is loosed in heaven. He knew that we needed that authority. And that authority is demonstrated through our priests who act in Jesus' very person.